We need to have a very direct, very honest conversation about something that happened during the Indiana Fever versus Golden State Valkyries game that has been generating significant and well-deserved discussion. Because embedded within a competitive basketball game that Indiana won 90-82, there were multiple moments that revealed something genuinely important about the culture of this team, about how it is evolving in response to the specific competitive challenges this season has presented, and about what kind of identity the Fever are building around Caitlin Clark as the season moves forward. The focal point of this conversation is Maisha Hines Allen, and what needs to be said about her in the context of this game has nothing to do with her offensive production, her shooting percentages, or any statistical category that appears.
Extended period of Caitlin Clark's professional career, there has been a documented and visible pattern of opposing players targeting her physically. Flagrant fouls, hard contact away from the play, provocative physical interactions designed to disrupt her rhythm and her competitive confidence. And the response from her teammates in those moments has frequently been insufficient. Players have watched. Players have expressed verbal displeasure from a distance. But the immediate, decisive, physical positioning that communicates without ambiguity that a confrontation stops at a specific point has not always been reliably present within the Indiana Fever's competitive culture. Maisha Hines Allen provided that presence in the Valkyries game, without hesitation, without calculation, sprinting into the situation before it could escalate further, placing her body as the barrier between Clark and whoever was looking to extend the confrontation. That is not a small thing in the competitive culture of professional basketball. That is a team-defining statement about what the standards are for how players protect each other and what message is being sent to every opponent on the schedule going forward. To understand why this matters as deeply as it does, you need to appreciate the history of the Connecticut Sun game from the previous season. A game in which Clark was subjected to repeated physical provocations while the competitive environment around her felt unprotected. That moment and the conversations it generated about whether Clark's teammates were sufficiently committed to standing alongside Maisha Hines Allen's behavior in the Valkyries game is the kind of moment that begins addressing that concern in a direct and visible way. The comparison to Sophie Cunningham is completely appropriate and deserves explicit acknowledgement. Cunningham built her enormous platform and her profound connection with the Indiana Fever fan base, growing to 1 million followers in what felt like overnight at one point. Not primarily through her offensive statistics or her shooting efficiency, she built it because fans watched her physically step up for Caitlin Clark in confrontational moments and recognized it as something genuinely valuable and previously absent from this team. The competitive and personal loyalty that action communicated resonated with a fan base that has watched Clark face repeated physical challenges and wanted to see her protected by the people who benefit most from playing alongside her. The formula is not complicated to understand. Clark is the most important player on this roster and one of the most commercially and competitively significant players in this league. Players who demonstrate genuine physical, in-the-moment commitment to protecting her and standing alongside her in difficult situations earn the respect and the loyalty of the fan community that has invested so deeply in watching Clark succeed. Cunningham earned it through her actions in specific documented moments. Hines Allen has now done the same in the same visible and direct way, and the fan community watching this game has responded with the same recognition. The specific situations where Hines Allen's intervention was most clear are worth describing precisely. Clark hit a logo 3, one of the deep, pulled-up, off-the-dribble bombs that define her game at its most dangerous and that she has been hitting with increasing frequency in recent games. And the competitive exchange that followed in the immediate aftermath of that made shot created a tense confrontational moment with an opposing player. Hines Allen moved into position without any deliberation. She was there, physically opposing player directed toward Clark, and Hines Allen's response was immediate and decisive, positioning herself front and center to make clear that the situation had a boundary, and that boundary was her. This is what enforcers provide in team sports. They do not necessarily produce the most points or appear in the highlights for their offensive creativity. Their value operates on a different frequency. They establish and maintain the competitive environment that allows the best players to operate with a degree of psychological security that comes from knowing teammates will respond definitively when opponents cross lines. Caitlin Clark operating with the knowledge that Maisha Hines Allen is going to sprint into the frame if something happens is a fundamentally different competitive environment than Clark operating without that certainty. That difference does not appear in any box score, but it is real, and it shapes how opponents calculate the cost of targeting Clark physically in every game for the remainder of this season. The Indiana Fever have needed this for a long time. There were games in recent seasons where opposing teams made the calculation that physical provocations directed at Clark would go without serious consequence from her teammates. That calculation shaped how those opponents approach specific defensive assignments in specific competitive situations. The combination of Sophie Cunningham and Maisha Hines Allen, two players who have now demonstrated on camera in live competitive situations that they will physically position themselves to protect Clark without requiring any deliberation time, changes that calculation for every team preparing to face Indiana going forward. Word travels quickly in professional sports. Opposing coaches watch film. Players talk to each other. The message that Hines Allen sent in this game will be received, understood, and factored into how opponents approach the physical dimensions of competing against the Indiana Fever. That is a team-building achievement that this organization needed and that deserves recognition alongside every statistical discussion about this roster. Now let us address Stephanie White's post-game podium appearance, because something happened there that requires honest and direct acknowledgement rather than being absorbed into the background noise of the season's larger narratives. White made genuinely positive, specific, and thoughtful comments about Caitlin Clark's performance and competitive identity following this game. This is noteworthy because the pattern across this season, across the public communication from this coaching staff about their most important player, has not consistently reflected this kind of direct, warm, and accurate characterization of what Clark contributes and what makes it on the court. The trash talking, the demonstrative competitive responses after significant plays, the direct confrontational communication in opponents' faces, represents a problem that needs to be managed or a character flaw that reflects poorly on the player. White's counter to that framing was to describe Clark's emotional intensity as something she uses deliberately to fuel her own competitive performance. That characterization reflects a more nuanced emphasis on her perimeter activity is coming at the expense of the interior game that historically represents her most efficient and most impactful offensive production. When Boston is established in the post as a genuine scoring threat from inside the paint, she creates a dimension of offensive difficulty that perimeter organs to answer. But genuine acknowledgement that something real happened in this game that represents progress toward the kind of team environment that Caitlin Clark deserves to operate within. Maisha Hines Allen sprinted to the frame. She did not hesitate. She stood in front of the player who needed protecting. And that decision, made in real time without deliberation, says more about the competitive culture being built around Caitlin Clark right now than any organizational statement or press conference comment ever could.